Yesterday in Wisconsin, primary election, obviously the presidential candidate's not in doubt, but there were other matters down ballot that were important, certainly in terms of signaling for November, particularly in a state that is a statistical dead heat right now between Biden and Trump. One of them was this, local race. You don't want to read too much into, but it is interesting because Wausau, Wisconsin, went for Biden by 8 percentage points in 2020.
Okay.
And there was a mayor's race there. The incumbent is a woman named Katie Rosenberg, who seemed to be a pretty big proponent of outside interlopers, Mark Zuckerberg's money, Mark Zuckerberg's personnel, serving as administrators in Wisconsin's elections at the local level in places like Green Bay, where Trump was. And she also is one of those you might find in a sanctuary community in Chicagoland, who is very welcoming to the Biden buddies that are here illegally.
I'm Katie Rosenberg, and I'm the mayor of Wausau, Wisconsin. I think the number one job of our cities is to make sure that we are exuding that welcoming behavior that we would like to see. So my goal here is to be as welcoming as possible. And one of the things we did when we started accepting new refugees, we realized, oh my gosh, we don't really have a lot of Dari speakers or Pashto speakers or whatever other language. So we got access to a quick language app. So if anybody in the city encounters somebody that they need to talk to, we're able to call up a translator immediately, show the phone, and have a good conversation back and forth. So that's one way that we are able to quickly make sure that everyone understands what we're doing.
I mean, you mean Google Translate that people have been using for years? Wow.
Yeah, but
so innovative.
It's more the attitude. You get it.
I know.
Right? It comes across pretty clearly. Well, she lost to a Republican by 4 percentage points.
4 percentage points? Okay.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, again, I don't want to read too much in it, but it is interesting given her out and proud sort of leftism when it comes to election integrity and open borders. That's number one. Number two, of course, these constitutional amendment questions, banning Zuckerbucks and prohibiting local election officials from outsourcing their duties to private actors financed by third parties like Mark Zuckerberg. And both of those measures Wisconsin voters approved. No more Zuckerbucks, and election officials, those elected and those administrators hired to be employees in these election departments for the administration of elections. Yeah, they got to be the locals. They got to be the elected official and the people that are full-time, payrollers in those departments, and not political activists that are drop-shipped by billionaires into local jurisdictions by billionaires from California. Interesting. This comes too, by the way, as some other developments in swing states like Georgia, a Senate bill that's going to Governor Brian Kemp that passed both the House and the Senate would grant access to Georgia's ballot to any political party that's qualified for the presidential ballot in at least 20 states or territories. That change could make it easier for, say, RFK Jr. to get on the ballot. And as we know from the polling, with RFK Jr. on the ballot, Trump's lead over Biden expands. Also in Pennsylvania, an encouraging ruling, a Third Circuit ruling that ends undated vote-by-mail ballots or vote-by-drop-box ballots. This has been going on since the 2020 election. The failure to fill in the required date field in vote-by-mail ballots. And so the Third Circuit said 2-1 this week that the lower court's position is wrong, cannot be reconciled with the text and historical backdrop of the statute. There's that purposivism that John Kennedy likes to ask Biden judicial nominees about. The point is that the undated ballots that were a source of much consternation Well, that's no longer going to be allowed, or at least allowed under color of law in Pennsylvania. So, again, these are not seismic, but they're important. And they're also important because not just in terms of the actual outcomes, but also because it drives engagement, like in Wisconsin, on these issues by the voters. And it sort of puts local officials and state officials on notice that people are paying attention this time around in a way that maybe in some places they were not last time around. One can only hope that the RNC and the Trump campaign, in concert with one another, are making advances with vote by mail programs and making advances with ballot integrity programs that will be much more robust come the fall than they were in the fall of 2020. For more on this and updates on Trump's legal matters, because she's hawking the courts in a way that almost nobody else is, we're pleased to be joined again by Julie Kelly. Julie Kelly is, her writings can be found at Substack, Declassified with Julie Kelly. She's also the author of the book, January 6th, How Democrats Used the Capitol Protest to Launch a War on Terror Against the Political Right. Julie, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. Thanks for having me on.
I know you're focused on the Trump trials, and we'll get to that, but I know you've written a lot about this topic as well, which is the right and proper administration of elections, ballot integrity. And so, the votes in Wisconsin and some of these developments in the courts, though they've taken a long time, as well as some legislative action in some of these swing states, I mean, they should be somewhat encouraging, even against the backdrop of, 7 to 10 million people here illegally that may find their ways on voter rolls. That's certainly a danger. So we have dangers, but we have some encouraging developments too.
I agree. And look, this speaks to the fact that, more than nearly 4 years after the 2020 election, poll after poll continues to show that at least half of the American public does not believe that the 2020 election was legitimate. And more than 2/3 of Republicans still have that view. Now, they really thought that the events of January 6th and the whole insurrection idea and trying to kick Trump off the ballot and others would quash the interest in making sure that state elections are secure. And now we have the most infortuitous timing for Democrats, where not only you see the backlash from voters, but you see other court proceedings, like in Georgia, there's court proceedings going on about the security of Dominion voting systems. And also new revelations coming out in the D.C. disbarment proceedings going on right now against Jeffrey Clark, who was one of Trump's top DOJ officials at the time. So, of course, this is very encouraging for our side, because anyone you talk to feels that they're going to be up to the same shenanigans in 2024 that they were 4 years ago. But this is, to your point, I think some encouraging news, and putting these election officials on notice that people are paying attention and will be paying attention related to this year's presidential election.
Well, a lot of voter integrity, or questions about voter integrity, came up because it took 13 days here in Cook County for them to count the ballots and decide who, our next state's attorney is going to be.
Well, Amy, and I think that was interesting, and you see this happening in other places as well. The Democrats have thought that, and their voters, more importantly, that this would only impact Republicans, right? The Democrats would do this, or whatever the lax voting rules, and all of a sudden coming up with 10,000 ballots somewhere would only be turned against Republicans. But of course, that's not the history. It's certainly not the history in Cook County. But these lax voting rules and suddenly coming up with mail-in ballots or harvested ballots or drop-box ballots would only hurt Republican candidates. And, the system is going to get who in office, for the most part, who they want to, whether it's Joe Biden or what we're seeing in Cook County and other places. So, I think that this is good progress, Dan, to your point, and Amy, yours as well. Voters are paying attention. They want our borders secure. They want our elections secure. They want their kids safe. This is fundamental stuff that the Biden regime is not able to deliver to the American people, and that's why he's on the ropes in all of these polls and desperate to come up with something to make him look reelectable.
Explain the development in the disbarment proceeding against Jeff Clark.
So I'm trying to watch that as well as, what's happening in these various Trump trials. But what's coming out, first of all, Jeff Clark was the acting deputy assistant attorney general. He is the one who drafted that letter to Georgia officials asking for some sort of investigation into what happened there. This is why the D.C. bar is trying to indict him. This is why he is part of Fani Willis's RICO indictment against Trump and others. It's really preposterous. And he had every right to do this as a Department of Justice official. But what is coming out is how William Barr, the Attorney General, and others around him and White House counsel were doing everything that they could to stymie any criminal investigations into these states related to election and voting fraud. And this is something that we were told the opposite of, that Bill Barr came out and said, we looked at this, remember, I think it came out December 1st of 2020. Yeah. We've looked at all these states. There's nothing there. We're shutting down these investigations. Well, what people are saying, officials are testifying the disbarment proceedings, is there was no investigation. To the contrary, Bill Barr, other people who then took his place, Jeffrey Rosen, Pat Cipollone, who was White House General Counsel, they were all trying to prevent people like Jeffrey Clark from pursuing investigations into what we now know and knew at the time were violations, illegalities, breaking state law about voting processes. So this is getting interesting too. And I think that he is developing now evidence that he can use in the RICO indictment, and if Jack Smith decides to bring charges against him as well.
Speaking of Jack Smith, doing his best to get the classified docs case to trial before November 5th. I mean, to trial and adjudicated before November 5th. It seems unlikely, but yeah, I saw that you pointed out he is on deadline to present draft jury instructions and try to keep this thing rolling forward. What's your handle on where that case stands and the likelihood that it moves before the election?
I mean, there is a slight chance, but I will tell you, Dave and Amy, the bad blood between Judge Aileen Cannon and the Department of Justice and Jack Smith really spilled over late last night and today, and I'll be posting on @Julie_Kelly too about both filings by Jack Smith and Team Trump. Judge Cannon's early request for draft jury instructions on the Espionage Act counts, 32 counts in Jack Smith's indictment, so-called classified documents case. She has asked both sides to prepare that jury instructions will be based on the Presidential Records Act. That Donald Trump, as president at the time, could determine what records were presidential, which ones were personal. Jack Smith, even though you'll recall this was the entire precedent for moving forward on a criminal indictment for the archives demanding these records back from Trump, was the Presidential Records Act, right? We went for months that, oh my God, Trump violated the Presidential Records Act. Well, now Jack Smith is saying, no, the Presidential Records Act has nothing to do with this case. Nothing to do with this indictment. He broke the Espionage Act law, and get this, he has no protection based on the language of the Espionage Act or the Presidential Records Act. This all goes back to Barack Obama's executive order on the handling and keeping of classified documents back from 2009. So he is now threatening, Jack Smith is threatening Judge Cannon, either decide on these jury instructions now, which she doesn't have to. They don't have to do this till really the mid or end of trial. And it's completely within her purview. But he is saying, decide these jury instructions. If you're saying that he's going to have protection under the Presidential Records Act, we're doomed. The jury's going to come back with a not guilty verdict. So decide now, because then we can appeal. Or take, and Dan, you'll understand the unusualness of this, seek a mandamus order from the 11th Circuit, the appellate order, which is basically telling the appellate court, tell Judge Cannon she's wrong, and you tell her exactly what to do, which is what we want.
Right. Well, so the other thing I think you tweeted about recently, we mentioned, was Based on watching this case proceed as closely as you have, you think that Eileen Cannon may yet dismiss the charges against Trump here, in part because of some of the comments she's made or intimated about unequal treatment on this matter of the handling of classified documents?
Right. So I've been to the courthouse there a few times, including March 14th. And this was 2 days after former special counsel Robert Hur testified before the American public in Congress trying to explain why Joe Biden would not be charged, even though he's a sitting president and can't be, but will not be charged with harboring classified documents, including national defense information, which represents the counts in Jack Smith's indictment against Trump. And this was 48 hours later in the courthouse, and you could tell that she was really pushing DOJ to explain the unprecedented nature of the charges against Trump, making them confirm that no former vice president or president had ever been charged with this, even though we know that there was history of this, including Joe Biden and even Mike Pence. And she was really drilling down on the unprecedented nature and what they kept calling the arbitrary enforcement of the Espionage Act.
Mm-hmm.
There is a selective vindictive motion to dismiss pending. She has not ruled on that. She also has not ruled on the Presidential Records Act motion to dismiss. So I think this is what she was signaling on March 14th is if she's going to dismiss this case based on anything, it will be the selective vindictive prosecution nature of Jack Smith's indictment.
Julie Kelly, I wanted to ask you about this relationship between Judge Merchan's daughter and Adam Schiff. Because it's I read the headline too on another website. I'm like, what is this, a soap opera? What's going on here?
Amy, I will tell you, just when you think you've seen it all in the Trump prosecutions, this really even stunned me. And this is Judge Juan Merchan, who is the judge in the so-called hush money case. And he has issued this broad gag order against Donald Trump, now including his daughter, that Donald Trump cannot make any comments about his daughter, Lauren. Well, Lauren Merchan is not a 5-year-old, which you would think based on the media coverage and hyperbolic, comments by people like Nicole Wallace. She is a 34-year-old woman who is the partner and president of a very lucrative digital media company called Authentic Campaigns. And she has had this at least 5-year business relationship with Adam Schiff. And she's been paid tens of millions of dollars from Adam Schiff's congressional campaign and now his Senate campaign, going back to 2019 and 2020, when Adam Schiff's campaign paid her $4 million, her company $4 million for 2 years. At the same time, Adam Schiff was leading impeachment against Trump and also bolstering, as I explained in my piece, Michael Cohen, turning Michael Cohen against Donald Trump. And Michael Cohen is now going to be a witness in the hush money trial presided over by her father. So as crazy as the conflicts I've seen between judges and prosecutors in D.C., this takes it to a whole new level.
Well, so and I mean this is like so straightforward. We talked about this with Andy McCarthy yesterday. First judicial ethics canon is avoid even the appearance of a conflict of impropriety. This obviously has more than at least the appearance, I should say. So you make a motion for him to recuse himself. He denies it, ostensibly he will, and then it will be appealed. I mean, I assume that's going to be the Trump legal team's approach. If nothing else, then for the purposes of slowing this down.
Well, this is something important for people to know as they think look, Donald Trump's lawyers filed a motion to recuse in May of 2023, and they detailed in that motion all of Lauren Merchan's connections to not just Adam Schiff. She also worked on Kamala Harris's campaign, and she did work for Joe Biden. So they detailed over $72 million in contracts and payments that her company received from Democrats. In August of 2023, Judge Merchan, very, not sure what the word would be, but he didn't really care, right? Nonchalantly denied the motion to recuse because, as you guys know, it's really the judge's decision to recuse or not. And he downplayed his daughter's association with all of these Democrats, that it did not pose any conflict. and he denied that motion to recuse. Now it looks like they're going to file another motion to recuse. But in the meantime, you now have this judge with a new gag order covering up his daughter's very lucrative political consulting contracts with all of these top Democrats, banning Donald Trump from publicly discussing it.
Well, he's not covering it up very well, is he? Because we're talking about it. So yeah, he's not going to get. I mean, he may get away with it. He may choose to ignore this conflict of interest. But again, it's sort of like Fani Willis prosecuting Trump in Fulton County. I mean, go ahead. Go ahead, preside over this case and give immediate grounds for appeal, even if Trump loses at the appellate level with respect to his recusal. It's the same thing as Fani Willis. Go ahead, keep her on the case. You're just making it more of a circus. You're just further degrading any prospect that a majority of the country will see these trials as legitimate. So go ahead, do your worst. All they do is they just can't help themselves because they so want to be a part of it for their own status within these political circles. All they're doing is aiding and abetting Trump's political interests. The guy, it's amazing. It's almost like he is picking his enemies. It's almost like he picked Judge Merchan. He picked Fani Willis. It's just remarkable. Julie Kelly, her Substack, Declassified with Julie Kelly, her book, January 6th, How Democrats Use the Capitol Protests to Launch a War on Terror Against the Political Right. Julie, thank you as always.
Thanks, Dan and Amy. Have a great day.
You too, and she joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line. Coming up on Chicago's Morning Answer.
At 8:38, we'll talk about that minimum wage law, highest in the nation for fast food workers in California that Steve Moore had mentioned last hour with Professor David Newmark of University of California, Irvine, the Anteaters. That's at 8:38.
But now let's head into the newsroom. Here's Mike Scott.
Snow showers and 34 degrees at 8:32. A federal appeals court today will hear again arguments